Pierre Poilievre may have secured the support of Conservative delegates this past weekend, but recent federal polling shows his party has some work to do when it comes to winning over most Canadians. This is a snapshot of some of the most recent numbers. All of these firms have the Liberals up, with the highest being Main Street, which has the Liberals at plus 15, with decided and leading voters. Leger and Liaison have the Liberals up 9 and up 8. Nanos and Abacus both have the Liberals at plus 4. And the Angus Reid Institute has the Liberals up 3. ECOS also has the Liberals up 14. Now, these rising Liberal fortunes may have played a role in helping recruit some high-profile candidates to run for the party. Yesterday, longtime MP and former Cabinet Minister Bill Blair resigned from his Scarborough Southwest seat to have become the High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. And today, the Liberals announced that the Ontario NDP deputy leader will run in Blair's former seat. Doly Begum was, until today, the Ontario NDP MPP for Scarborough Southwest. And the dominoes keep falling. Just hours after that announcement, Liberal MP Nathaniel Erskine-Smith said he will seek the Ontario Liberal Party's nomination to run in Begum's former riding. And while he says he plans to support the Prime Minister in the meantime, this could mean another by-election on the 2026 calendar. We're going to start there with the power panel, and there's going to be a quiz later in the segment. Supriya Trivedi was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Nathan Cullen is a former NDP MP and BC NDP minister, so maybe the Liberals will poach him next. Emily Nicholas, a columnist for Le Devoir. And here with me in the studio is Lisa Ray. She is a former Conservative cabinet minister. It's good to see you all. I do just want to start with some of the reaction of this new Liberal candidate who, as of this morning, was the Ontario New Democrat deputy leader. Here's how the federal NDP interim leader, Don Davies, reacted to this move.
You know, when Canadians see politicians betray the values and policies that they claim to believe in, I think it damages our democracy and it breeds cynicism in our politics. I'll leave it to Ms. Begum to explain to the people of Scarborough Southwest why she's abandoning the progressive policies she claimed to believe in to run for a party that is clearly governing like a Conservative party.
Okay, so Nathan Cullen, I want to start with you on that. I mean, Ms. Begum is resigning from the party and resigning her seat to join another party and run in a seat at another level of government. Is it really a cynical floor crossing, or someone quitting one job to seek a new job? How do you view it?
Well, two things can be true at once. While politics is politics, it also can be quite personal. And I think you heard that in the way Don Davies was talking about it, because it feels often like a betrayal. You go into these campaigns, you stand with a party, you support a leader and a platform. She's switching levels of government, so that can sometimes be a bit more nuanced for voters, and they may not hold her to account for that. But the general sense of the feeling is that sense of betrayal, and that you stood for something in the morning and then you stood for something in the afternoon. But I would imagine it's a mix of things. Of course, there's personal ambition, there's an opportunity. There's been a lot of talk online about the Liberals offering her cabinet. That would be illegal. You can't induce. You can hint, I suppose, but I suspect that's not what's going to happen, but who knows? And yeah, it's just that sense of like, when you go into the ballot box, a number of Canadian voters actually know the candidate. Not the most. Most know party leadership, or are voting on a particular set of issues that inspire them. And I think as people who are elected, you have to have a little humility in that. It ain't just you. It's the package you bring. It's the party you're running with that got you elected. And sometimes that humility can be lost.
So, Supriya, you know, when you look at so far the defections and the poaching efforts have been broadly about the Liberals reaching out to Conservatives, though Laurie Idlout was close to having a sit-down with the Prime Minister before Christmas. This is a move to protect the left flank to some degree, maybe? How do you view this, a reach out to the NDP MPP for Scarborough?
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine this was completely out of the blue, right?
No.
There must have been some sort of interest expressed along the way at some point for it to have then gotten back to either somebody at, you know, the Liberal Party or within the center to sort of have those discussions. And I think, you know, to Don Davies's point about this being a betrayal, I mean, yeah, or, I mean, the other side to that is that the Liberal Party is a big tent, and for all of the criticism that the Prime Minister has been getting, I mean, yours truly included, about running more to the right and perhaps leaving out some of his progressive left flank, I think this is an incredibly good get for the Prime Minister and the Liberal Party. Doly's a solid representative for Scarborough, and she'll be great in her role as a federal MP. And I don't want to take away from that being the substance of the story, but you kind of alluded to this in your lead up. I think the more prominent undercurrent here is what this has for the implications in Ontario politics, right? Both for Marit Stiles and the NDP in Ontario, as well as the Liberal leadership race. Than it does like rocking the federal landscape all that much. Because we've got some real now momentum in the Ontario Liberal leadership race with Nate Erskine-Smith saying he's running for leader and he's going to run in that Scarborough Southwest by-election. So let's see who else decides to throw their hat in the ring now.
Yeah, Lisa, right. It's one door opens, another door closes, and there's a big revolving door seemingly going on with all of these changes. Yeah. What do you make of this move? And it signals this will be, with Nate Erskine-Smith, the third pretty high-profile departure in a short period of time from the federal Liberals.
Did he say when he's going to be going?
No, it's when the nomination happens, when the by-election gets called. He's going to stay on until, it's up to Doug Ford, I guess, as when that by-election would be. So I don't know if he wants to go without a paycheck for a while, but he's got to figure that out.
It's really interesting. I think just something that Supriya just said made me think about this, that any person who is seeking the Liberal leadership in Ontario can announce that they plan on seeking a seat in that area. And it kind of takes out of the play anybody who's not within the caucus right now who is trying to become the leader of the Liberal Party, because there's going to be an open seat. Obviously, they're going to have the ability to run. So I think, Nate, it's interesting that he came out and announced it, but that probably is going to be the place where any new leader of the Liberal Party in Ontario is probably going to run. It's their first opportunity to do so.
Right. So, Emily, how do you see this, right? It's a New Democrat at one level moving as a Liberal to another level, and then, a Liberal sliding down. It's like a game of snakes and ladders. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I think to understand those kind of moves, you always need to take it side by side. There was a lot of floor crossing last fall when it comes to the Conservative to the Liberal, and I think in the current context it made more sense in the sense that you do have a Liberal government that has shifted to the right of what the Trudeau era represented. And so it makes sense that if there are people within the Conservative Party that are a little bit more progressive conservative who want to be in power, that they would move over. For somebody who comes from the NDP to go to Mark Carney right now is more counterintuitive. And when you read the statement that she put forward in terms of explaining her decision, it reads more like a line than an actual explanation. So I'm just curious. I do want to understand what the line of reasoning is, because it's not a first historically. I think Bob Rae is perhaps the most famous Ontario NDPer to have switched to the federal Liberal. You've had the reverse in the past. I'm thinking of Tom Mulcair, who was a Quebec Liberal before becoming an NDP leader, although a lot of NDPers would agree that he was not necessarily a Democrat while he was leading the NDP in some cases.
I'm watching Nathan Cullen to see how he reacts to this.
No comment.
So that was kind of a weird move or era ideologically for the federal NDP at that time. But you've seen that. But it's not because it's unprecedented that it's necessarily a great idea. I think it needs a reasoning. And right now, what makes me go about this one is that there is no proper explanation that addresses people's smarts and intelligence when you're just saying it's for prosperity and Canadian unity. You already had a job working in provincial parliament, building towards that. Why was your job wrong, and why is this one better? I still want to know more.
Those are good questions, with Ms. Begum may have to answer should she do a news conference. But look, I want to fit this in, these changes into that larger political dynamic we talked about off the top. Just want to show the numbers from the recent string of polls from most of the major polling firms over the last little while. You can see the numbers there. The NDP high watermark is at 13% with Nanos. And Lisa, if you look at this, the Conservatives, it's a solid high 30s, but it's below where they were in the election, and all of the Liberal outcomes there are majority, pretty much, right? Like for the most part. A lot of the conversation we've had on the show is that, the Mark Carney moving the Liberals kind of to the center, to the right, would open up the left flank. Has that happened, or has he just sort of broadened the middle in a way that the NDP and Mr. Poilievre has the right, but he's running up against Mark Carney, and Carney's just kind of expanded it? Like, how do you see the map right now?
I don't see it as anything other than trying to get the best candidate who can have name recognition in the riding in order to win the seat for the Liberals. I think that's what it comes down to. I don't think it's right or left.
No, but the big national dynamic, right?
Right.
Like he's had some conservative floor crossers. There's a New Democrat willing to join, and you just see they're above where they were in an election, that they almost won a majority. Just what does that mean for where the country is and what it means for Mr. Poilievre, for example?
Snapshot in time, obviously.
Yeah, sure.
He had a good week in Davos. Everything seems to be going their way right now. But I still think that the way it breaks down underneath those polls is demographics. And I still see that Mr. Poilievre has a real great hold on people 35 and under. And Mr. Carney has a real hold on people 50 and over. And whether or not that's right or left or center or middle, I don't know. But it really is dividing out that way in terms of when you break down the polls underneath. But we're going to see what ends up happening. I'm just grateful that when I heard the word floor crosser, it wasn't one of mine. Because what a day for that to happen with Harper in town. It would have been awful.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk about Mr. Harper and his speech, because he had some really interesting stuff to say right at the end in particular about internal and external challenges to the country. But Nathan Cullen, I just wonder what you make of this. Like, if you look at the last election, we're kind of like the second chance for Mr. Poilievre in Calgary, but still second thoughts, right, for a lot of Canadians, in that he unquestionably hit a high watermark in the election, but it's kind of trending down since then. I mean, when you look at that and a New Democrat joining Conservatives with the Liberals, where does this leave the Conservatives right now as they try to build back now that they've settled the leadership question?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to overstate, and not to diminish it, it's important, but I wouldn't want to overstate the decision by a provincial MPP deciding to run federally for the Liberals. It is what it is, but I don't think it describes anything that's going to have impact on the next election, let's say. I think the 800-pound gorilla in the room remains Trump. And Mr. Carney's in a good space because he was able to speak truth to power in Davos. Canadians responded to that. His challenge is going to be time and performance. That the breaking or changing of our dynamic with the US and the ability to actually reassure Canadians with job announcements and budgets that make sense, and the ability to reform how Canada is built and how we look out to the world is going to have to show some results. Way easier for Mr. Carney to make that argument in a spring election than it would be later. I'm not one who generally thinks they're rushing to the polls. I'm just saying it would be easier to say, I just got started. You get into the fall, you get into next spring, you get into next fall. Canadians, if we're facing the continued barrage from Mr. Trump and the damage it's doing to our economy, Mr. Carney's going to have some results. The challenge for him is a lot of his projects take a long time to show results,
right,
unless he's able to start to turn some things around on the more immediate and the front burner. So I don't think it's right, left, always, there's issues. But I think the central existential sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs for Canadian voters is, what do you do about this guy in the White House, and who's best equipped to do it? And so far, that the response has been Mr. Carney, and that's what the polls show.
Thucydides one week, Maslow the next week. You know, it's a bookish group we got here. Supriya, what are your thoughts on what we're seeing there in those numbers? Because it's now a constellation of polls that show, pretty majority level support for the Liberals.
Yeah, and I mean, I would also just slightly push back on Lisa's assessment of the demographic split about Liberals being, doing quite well with the boomer crowd and Conservatives doing quite well with the younger crowd. I think that was certainly true for the election, but some of the more recent polling has seen that gap either disappear or at least narrow substantively. But I think the overall assessment is quite right by both Nathan and Lisa, which is, right now Trump is pretty front and center, right? So Canadians are going to be putting their votes behind the guy that they think can properly represent Canada and the interests of Canadians. And, thus far, what we've heard from the Conservatives, particularly from Mr. Poilievre and some of his front bench, has been to sort of ignore Trump, or in some cases, at least prior to the election, you had Mr. Poilievre saying it's not the Americans' fault, it's our fault, and that we were stupid. Canadians don't quite like that when they're being, threatened and bullied by the president of the United States. Like, any reasonable person can see right now that the problem with our relationship is not Prime Minister Carney, it's President Trump, who is the one, making threats of annexation and referring to our prime ministers as, now 2 in a row as governor.
Yeah, and who knows where America goes in the medium to long term, even after the Trump presidency ends. Emily, what are your thoughts on what we're seeing with the shift in political dynamic? I don't know if Mr. Poilievre, now that the leadership review is behind him, is more comfortable maybe confronting the Trump issue, or if he might leave it. But the numbers, what do you make of what we saw there?
I think it's not often that Canadians are making political decisions out of fear. The way they have been since Donald Trump got reelected. And because it's not a dynamic that has played out too often in this country's history, I think a lot of analysts are waiting in unknown territory right now when it comes to understanding electoral behavior. If we do take the hypothesis that Canadians are afraid of the American empire collapsing on us, it means that whoever is more prime ministerial is the person that sounds like the adult in the room. Right. And that's not about right or left. That is a personality test and a resume test and a world leader potential test. And I think that's why it's so historically unusual that Justin Trudeau had been in power for 2 mandates, 3 if you count the minority government, and then you have Mark Carney get elected. And we again have a Liberal government. It's so unusual, and the reason is that Mark Carney was an unusual guy at a unusual time. And Pierre Poilievre is somebody that has been in politics for a really long time and that has succeeded in business as usual for Canada positional politics. And that's why you're seeing this gap of there are people who like the Conservatives as an option, as a party, as the ideas that the Conservatives represent. But when it comes to Prime Minister, who's the best Prime Minister for Canada right now, it's likely that any person who's have a life experience outside of the House of Commons or outside of just the Ottawa bubble is likely, of any brand, would actually come out as the best Prime Minister. And that, by the way, included Justin Trudeau himself. Right. So that is not just a partisan issue. And I think that's where we are as a country right now. We need to get that if we want to read the polls correctly.
Okay, an interesting development today. There is a Conservative MP who is heading to Washington to try to help broker a trade deal with the Trump administration. Here is Jivani defending his decision today with this online video.
I want to help Prime Minister Mark Carney be successful in negotiating a trade deal with the United States. Now that might sound counterintuitive because I am a principled Conservative, he is our Liberal Prime Minister, but the reality is that this is not a partisan issue. There are people who've been running around this country for over a year now, talking about their elbows, flapping about. I just don't find that impressive. I don't find it serious.
Okay, so Lisa, an MP, Conservative MP, a good friend with J.D. Vance. What do you make of this move that Mr. Jivani is, like, I don't know, on a diplomatic trip to Washington, D.C.?
Is he being sent by the opposition?
That is unclear. He tends to do things kind of on his own. But, you know, there was some suggestion that maybe the Conservatives could help with this and would. I do not know.
Broadly speaking, David, I would say it's always helpful when Canadians would like to help the government and the opposition to find a path to having a better relationship with the United States. Mm-hmm. Broadly speaking, I don't know whether or not Mr. Jivani is going to be successful. And I don't know whether or not Mr. Jivani has set out what exactly he expects that he's going to accomplish. But when he figures that out, I'd like to know, because I'd like to measure him against those key points, because we're measuring everybody else in terms of what they're bringing back. So if he wants to go down there, and I know I sound a little bit cruel, but if he wants to go down there and make a fuss and say that he's going to go and negotiate a deal, then bring something back and show us what you did and show your work on it. Otherwise, You're just making a statement during a time when we're talking about unity in this country today here in Ottawa. Very much so, and how we have to work together. It would have been nice to have seen him at the Harper unveiling.
Do you think this is about other ambitions?
I have no idea.
Okay. Just for the record, we've reached out to Mr. Jivani and invited him to join us on the show to talk about this. Supriya, your thoughts on what Jamil Jivani's doing here?
First of all, Lisa, nobody could ever describe you as cruel, so let's get that out of the way. But I will just say that the first thing that jumped out at me in that video is that there's no conservative branding anywhere. Like, he's got his name behind him on that blue banner thing in the background, and presumably there's a CPC logo on there somewhere, but you don't see it. All you see is him and a Restore the North cap, right? Which is his own personal thing associated with his brand, not his leader's brand. But that said, the tone that Jamil is taking is like, way better than, I guess, what's been on offer from Poilievre and the bulk of the Conservative front bench over the better half of the year. Like, let's be honest, if the Conservatives had stated most of what Jamil had said in that video during the election, there's a very good chance they'd be in government right now. But I think the problem that Jamil will run into, aside from what Lisa has, very astutely pointed out, is that eventually you got to call out the cause of all of this mess, right? And there's one sole person that is responsible for that, and that is Donald Trump. And while the Conservatives want to make this about the Prime Minister failing to get a deal or whatever, having his elbows too far up, any reasonable person can see that our Prime Minister is not the cause of our issues with the U.S. right now. And, if I'll also be interested in seeing how the Liberals react, and I don't just mean the response from the center. Like, I think seeing what some of the more attack dog type MPs in caucus do with this will be interesting, because there's a lot of material here. But I would just say that what Jamil is offering on its face in that video, which is cross-partisan cooperation, to Lisa's point, is what people want. People want an all-Canadian, hands-on-deck response when it comes to the U.S. But again, to Lisa's point, I'll just end on this. He doesn't represent the government of Canada, nor does he represent the official opposition. He doesn't even have like a critic role in those on those opposition benches. He represents the good people of Bowmanville, Oshawa North, which is all well and good, but in no way does he have any authority or legitimacy whatsoever in negotiating with the U.S. on a complicated and multifaceted file.
Okay.
Hear, hear.
All right. I'll put Supriya and Lisa down as skeptical, maybe undecided. I don't know. Nathan and Emily, your quick thoughts on this, because I do want to save time for what former Prime Minister Harper had to say, because he ended his speech today with a very important note, and I wanted to get to that. So Nathan and then Emily, and then we'll get to the former Prime Minister.
Well, as a member of the Bald Brotherhood, I want to support him. I want to be there for him. I watched the entire 5-minute video. 5 minutes I'm not going to get back. I have no idea what he's going to do, who he's going to meet with, and as has been said, what authority he has to talk to anybody about Canada's interests. This feels like a self-promotion campaign. It's nice. I love the idea of an all-party, let's lean in. But if you make an offer to help and the government says, thank you, no thank you, you have no authority to go and talk to the Americans really about too much that's going to move the trade relationship along, especially with the Trump White House. So he's probably going to meet with Vance because they're friends. And then to Lisa's point, he'll get some tweets and some likes. But in terms of the larger question, come on, let's be serious. This is not a serious endeavor by any estimation of what we need right now as a country. But then he took a lot of shots. People walking around, virtue signaling, elbows up. Those are all partisan shots against the Liberals, I assume. So don't do the nonpartisan partisan thing. That's boring. But again, back to my first point, as a fellow bald man, I hope he does well, because we need more of us represented.
Emily, you're never going to be in the bald caucus, but your quick 20, 30 seconds on Jamil Jivani, because I do want to get to Stephen Harper.
No comment on bald thing. First of all, the elephant in the room is the silence on Pierre Poilievre when it comes to everything that Jamil Jivani is doing. I want to know what Pierre Poilievre is thinking. The other thing is that I cannot help but notice that Jamil Jivani is practicing an American style of politics, in the sense that his even with the sign and his name in the background, it's something that he would do as somebody who's a congressman more than somebody that's an MP. And so I'm thinking that he's taking some of his inspiration from the U.S. in terms of how he behaves. And the third thing is that I think that he's acting in good faith, in the sense that he's relying on his personal friendship with the prime minister, with the vice president, sorry. And I think that is what's going to end up biting him in the behind, in the sense that Donald Trump and the Trump administration seems to be bent on destroying the Canadian economy and to exploit our weaknesses or whatever else. We exploit anything they can to make that happen. And in that sense, having a single MP going in saying they're going to solve things is something that the White House can use. It's also something that GD Vance will have no power whatsoever over, and that Donald Trump doesn't seem to be treating sometimes GD Vance with utmost respect in a lot of things. And that it's not like his personal friendship with GD Vance will protect him for being thrown under the bus by the White House. If that happens, I really hope it doesn't. But I do think that Jamil Jivani is putting himself in danger in a way that it doesn't seem to necessarily get that the White House right now is like malevolent, manipulative narcissist, and that there is no way a friendship can actually mean anything if Donald Trump is bent on destroying the Canadian economy.
Okay, I want to get to Stephen Harper, because here in Ottawa, Parliament is marking the 20th anniversary of Prime Minister Stephen Harper's election. Harper's official portrait was unveiled today, painted by Toronto artist Phil Richards. And this will hang in the House of Commons foyer. Harper, who served as Prime Minister for nearly a decade, had this message for parliamentarians.
I sincerely hope that mine is just one of many portraits of Prime Ministers from both parties that will continue to be hung here for decades and centuries to come. But that will require that in these perilous times, both parties, whatever their other differences, come together against external forces that threaten our independence and against domestic policies that threaten our unity. We must make any sacrifice necessary to preserve the independence and the unity of this blessed land.
So, Lisa, a pretty clarion call there.
Yep.
And can I just say, this is one of those reassuring moments in Canadian democracy, with Prime Minister Harper, Prime Minister Carney, Francis Scarpaleggi, the Liberal Speaker, all together to celebrate service to the country, and then a call to stand up and preserve the country. Yep. What did you make of that message from your old boss?
It was great. I was in the room. And you're right. What you point out is the fact that Mr. Carney, Mr. Harper had a great rapport. You could see them chatting with one another when they're sitting on the dais. And the message was really clear. It's one Canada, guys. It's one Canada. That's what matters. That's what we're here for. We're up against a really tough situation right now, and we have to pull together in the same direction. And I thought it was a really good message to everybody in the room. I would reflect that it came after us witnessing question period today. Mr. Harper went to question period. Some of his old cabinet, including myself, went, and we watched the two parties fight on the House of the floor. And maybe that's what made him think a little bit more about working together, because it wasn't a great day for question period.
No, those rarely happen, it seems. You know, occasionally they surprise us. So, Nathan, just your thoughts on this, as someone who was around with, you know, a lot of the politicians on display today. That message there, as yourself as a former member of Parliament and a BC cabinet minister.
I think it was, I mean, Lisa knows this, and you as well. I had more than my few disagreements with Mr. Harper on policy levels, but we always got along personally. That made the work, which is challenging, of being a parliamentarian a lot easier. I found Mr. Harper, when he said he was going to do something, would do it. It often things I didn't like. The message today, at least he followed through. The message today, I think, was very much appropriate to the moment. And this is kind of one of the challenges that the opposition, the current opposition, have, Mr. Poilievre, the NDP, the Bloc, is that Canadians are looking for this resonance of, holy cow, these are just terrible times with an unpredictable and potentially psychopathic leader in the White House. What do we do? And we can have our disagreements, we can have terrible question periods, but when we face the world, is there a need for unity? Is there an ability for us to speak with essentially one voice, even though we have disagreements about our path forward? And I think Mr. Harper is moving into statesmanship. And that's what it looks like, is that you step a little bit beyond your more comfortable zones of partisanship. And I think that is appropriate. And gosh, what a relief from what we see south of the border. Two prime ministers, two former foes, just being able to chat and have a good laugh. It's quite Nice.
And
Yeah.
Mr. Chrétien in the front row.
Right. Yeah, and he shared
Exactly
a stage
right.
with
Yeah.
Mr. Harper yesterday. And Prime Minister Carney gave quite a nice speech
Very nice.
about Stephen Harper. You compare that with the auto pen portrait hanging in various parts of the White House in
so
the U.S.
terrible.
You know, it is one of those reassuring moments. But his line there at the end, "We must make any sacrifice necessary, Supriya." That's a pretty clarion call from the former Prime Minister, given the moment we're in as a country.
It is. And I don't remember exactly when Prime Minister Harper would have given these remarks, and I'm paraphrasing to a degree, but he did say when, if he were still Prime Minister and faced with the threats from the U.S., he'd be willing to, do all sorts of things.
Yeah.
In order
Tank
to
the
maintain
economy
our
to save
right?
the country,
It was his
essentially, is
op-ed.
what he was
You're
saying.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's the sort of mentality that we should all be having right now. And it's incredibly heartening to see, as both Nathan and Lisa have pointed out, Mr. Harper with Mr. Chrétien, just there, two former prime ministers, bros, laughing it up, like getting along as people. We can all disagree on policy. And again, I know this is a good time for Conservatives to be, getting the crew back together, having a reunion in Ottawa. But for Liberals or Bloc Québécois or NDPers that are particularly around my age, I mean, we have a lot to thank Prime Minister Harper for as well, because he's the reason why we got into politics, because of disagreements on policy. And, it's not because I thought he was some existential threat to democracy, but it's because I was pissed off that Canada was adopting the global gag rule when it came to abortion and reproductive rights in our foreign policy. You know what I mean? And I think that's a good reminder that we can, again, disagree on policy vehemently, but when it all comes down to it, we should all be Team Canada.
Okay. Emily, I got 30 seconds, and then I got to say goodbye. So your quick thoughts on what Mr. Harper had to say.
In 30 seconds, I will say that to me what was more striking, it was the moment when he shared the stage over the weekend with Jean Chrétien talking about now is the time for nationalism.
Yeah.
And it was striking because it was just a couple of days after the Council of Federation basically spent their entire meeting having to deal with both Alberta and Quebec separatism.
Right.
And I think that is the background in which, against which everything that's being said about Stephen Harper or by Stephen Harper himself is happening. And I think we need to bear that in mind. It's not about the other political parties in Ottawa. It's about Quebec and Alberta choosing this moment of all moment in our country's history to stir that turmoil again. And it's the question of what are we going to do about it that's still unanswered by everybody, including Stephen Harper and Jean Chrétien.
Well, he had that line that we must stand up against any external threat that threatens our independence, any internal policy that threatens our unity. I'm paraphrasing there, but broadly, you want 10 seconds?
Best high school reunion ever.
All right. All right. Yeah. We'll have fun at the Harper prom. All right. I want to thank you all. Lisa Raitt, Supriya Deveni, Nathan Cullen, Emily Nicola.